All right. Artilo Diaries. Bob Coronato's never seen one of my podcasts on
I was being honest.
No, it's good because we were talking beforehand. And I'm like, oh, you probably maybe watched one of the podcasts. And like, nope, I haven't. And I said, okay, well, here's what you're in for, which is pretty straightforward. We just talk about who and what you are, as an artist. And it's, right now you're living duality, right? You live in Cave Creek and you also live in Wyoming, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about, I'm going to take those from you. There you go. No, I can say. And he doesn't believe he doesn't need his notes, but I'm not going to let him have them because you know why? I know we don't need them.
Okay.
So you live at Devil's Tower right next to it, right?
Right down the street.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it turns out it's considered the most spiritual place in the world. I didn't know that, but
I would believe that.
It is for the native people, too.
Yeah, well, I'm going to come visit you this summer, and I'm going to go by and see it.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually really excited to see it. And for those who don't know what it is, maybe describe it because...
It's a basalt monolith, which looks like a big volcano sticking out of the ground. Most famous for being in Close Encounters. The guy was making mashed potatoes out of it.
Right.
That was it.
And so is it a sacred, I'm sure it's still sacred, but is it open to the public to go to that?
It was the first national monument dedicated by
that's right,
Teddy Roosevelt.
That's exactly right, it was.
Yeah, and it's where the lots of La Crows, the Cheyennes, the Lakota, they come to pray.
Yeah.
And they're blessing it the last 10 years for preparing it for a Sundance.
Yeah. So. And I think we talked about this once before, but you don't ever get tired of that, do you? I mean, or not tired. Clearly, that's not the right word. It's like you don't get used to it. I mean, it's always new and different, I would think.
It's always got a presence, and it's always different. I got lucky enough to be moving 2,000 head of cows right through it, and that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So you see it from all perspectives. There's a ranch behind it that's about 35,000 acres that I was working on. And so that one, every day you're riding by it.
Right.
So that was cool.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you're an artist. You have your own shop and things too, where you sell not only your etchings and your original artwork, but also Native American stuff because you're very knowledgeable in that area as well, right?
Yeah. So I built basically two careers at the same time.
Yeah.
One out of necessity, one out of just, it was going that direction since I was 12 years old. The first great piece I ever found was at 12.
Yeah.
And I found an original Charles Strayvogel for $10.
Where was this? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New Jersey.
So you're in New Jersey and you find this?
Yeah. And that's where he actually had a studio. He was in Hoboken. So it made sense that there was stuff laying around and I ended up finding one. And the funny thing was, as you know, in our business, art and antiques and native stuff, the key is knowledge. Knowledge, you need books.
Yes.
I got 10,000 books now, but at the time I only owned 3.
Yeah.
I'm 12 years old. I owned 3 books, and one of those books had a painting of Charles Strayvogel in it. And so when I got to this end, I remember asking my dad, I said, take me to an antique store. So he goes, okay. And my dad was notoriously cheap. So he'd put your hands in your pockets. So I put my hands in my pockets. I'm walking around and I found it. And I wasn't sure it was, what it was, except I recognized the signature. It said Ches Strayvogel.
Right.
So I went, I don't know if that's Charles. So I put it back and I hid it behind the desk in the antique store.
Right.
And we went home and went and got my books out. And sure enough, it was a match and raced back to buy it. So.
And were you matching the name or were you it wasn't that particular piece, right?
No, it was the name.
Yeah,
so it was a pen and ink drawing that he had done when he was training.
Wow. And so do you remember what it cost?
$10.
It was $10.
Yeah.
And what would that be worth now in today's world, do you think?
Years later, I did trade it off.
I'm sure. I mean, that's
but I got the equivalent of about 10,000.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But it was one of those things where it was one of my first great find. So it's like, I'm going to keep this the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But as you know, as you go and you start getting more things, eventually you're like, oh, I'll trade that.
Yeah.
But
I just traded off my comic book collection, which I started when I was like 10 for about 3 years. And I kept them perfectly in their thing because I loved the artwork. It wasn't the stories. I actually liked the artwork.
Yeah.
And I traded all those to Mateo Romero for a big painting.
That's
just recently. He loved the comics, it's probably even trade. It was close enough. I didn't care.
Yeah.
And I got what I wanted and he got what he wanted.
That's great.
I know, right? So that does happen when you do that. So when you're growing up in New Jersey as a kid, are you thinking cowboys and Indian kind of thing? You're a little younger. You're born in 1970. So, were you watching television shows of that kind of stuff or?
Yeah. So I jokingly blame it on my first class trip. I was in kindergarten and just down the road was a cheesy little tourist trap called Wild West City, Stanhope, New Jersey. And to set the stage, New Jersey, where I'm from, was countryside, rural, horses, cattle.
Right.
Wasn't what you picture New Jersey.
Right.
And but so they had this little western town, and my first big trip out in the world was to Wild West City, and I'm on the stagecoach that gets held up. And it's been cowboys ever since. I always jokingly say, I'm glad it wasn't the circus. I'd be painting clowns.
But what did your dad do,
So my dad was he was older for like most people my age don't have a dad that was a liberator from World War II. He liberated Buchenwald.
Wow.
And so I was raised by a World War II generation.
Wow.
So I have a different look on life anyway. And my mom was a corporate secretary. Dad was a CPA.
Wow. Did he ever talk about that liberation?
I found photographs of the death camps when I was a kid in the garage, and then they disappeared.
Had he taken them?
Yeah.
What was that when you saw that? What was that thought?
I can see it in my brain still.
I bet.
But he confiscated them and threw them out.
Yeah. How old was that? How old were you when you were that?
As kids, we had boxes of Nazi stuff in the garage that he'd captured, and every now and then when he wasn't around, we'd dig through them. And when I knew that I found those, my mom would throw a lot of that stuff out.
Yeah.
So, but I remember him painting the house in a Nazi sweater and his army boots that he walked across Europe in.
Wow.
So it's pretty unusual to be born in 1970 and that's your dad, But
yeah, but that happens.
Yeah.
No, I mean.
So it sets you up for a love of history. He didn't talk about it much, but he loved history. He was quiet. And because probably of what he had seen, when I wanted to go, I was from a tight-knit family. No one had left a mile from each other in generations.
Right.
And I wanted to go out to California to go to art school. And my dad said, well, go. Because when I got back from the Europe, my mom said, you'd been away too long. And his dream was to go to California.
Oh, wow.
So he just was like, go, do it.
And what did he want to do for a living?
He said he hated accounting, but he was good at it and he did it. And he kind of wished he had pursued a career. He never really said what it would have been, but he's good. He was a good draftsman. I do remember going through seeing so I got the talent, I think, through his bloodline because his mother was born in the 1800s.
Yes.
And, she could look at you and knit you a shirt and it would fit you perfectly. So she had an ability, to see.
To draft.
Yeah.
Yes. And so were you interested, obviously, in art? You must have been.
We didn't have any art in the house.
Yeah.
One horse painting over the couch.
Yes.
Kind of like I hate to say like a painting on velvet, but close.
Yeah, it probably was, actually. I get it.
But, at the time, I didn't really have any artistic ability. But I always had this, I would sit with the older folks and listen about history. Mm-hmm. So they'd sit around the table and talk, especially at a typical like Italian style, long dinners that last 10 hours, and then they'd get to the dessert and everyone would sit around and tell stories of the old country or World War II and stuff. Right. And then I remember looking at my grandmother, knowing she was born in the 1800s and just thinking, I need to remember her. So
wow. That's so rare.
I would stare at her and just to try to remember like noises that she made or little things that she did.
You recognize the finite of life at that time.
Yeah.
Again, one has to go back. Is that related to what you saw and what your father went to?
I don't know.
I mean.
I just knew there were things that I just knew. There were things I knew as a kid that you can't explain that you should know. So when I started painting was like, I started in 8th grade. I did 4 paintings. And by the 5th painting, I could paint photorealism.
So you were a good artist.
15 years old. I still have it because
Right.
most people don't believe that, but I
Yeah.
still have it so I can say, no, see, look
Yeah.
at that. And it was so I did a sunset, I did a bird, and then a couple more sunsets, and then I did a grist mill in the woods that is like water flowing, and it's still photoreal to this day, you know. And so I told my mom I felt like I was remembering more than I was learning.
Mm.
And I don't know why I said that, but I did.
Mm.
So it wasn't until a couple years into high school that there was a summer program you could take in New York City, Parsons. So I took it.
Great.
Yeah. So I went there, and I remember I was kind of led by the heart. You know, I was always straight honest. You know, so I was like, I asked the teacher, "Do you think I can make a living at this?" And I always think back to that moment, because if she had said,
No.
it's really hard, or no,
Yeah.
I would have ended it right there.
Yeah.
It was right down to that one person. But she goes, "Oh, no, you could do that." I said, "Okay." And I just believed it.
Right.
So I thought, I'm going to do this. And so then I pretty much was not very good at anything else. And so I was getting better at art. But I would sit down and
you were
paint.
good at finding something for $15 by Strogroval at 15 years of age. That's something good.
Well, I remember after that I was hooked. And I would go, I was actually doing the same thing I'm doing now
Yeah.
at 12. So I had a museum in my bedroom. I had a bookcase. I'd taken all the books out and put stuff in there, fossils and rocks and whatever Western I could find. And then I screwed plexiglass on the front of it so no one could take it. My older brother would knock on the door of my bedroom and say, "Do I need to pay admission to come in?"
Oh, that's so funny.
And then, so then I would ask my dad, because I couldn't drive. So I'd say, "Take me to an antique store." And then I remember telling him, I said, I could make a living walking through these antique stores because I could see patterns.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you see something and you see something and you see it again. And now it's priced a third of what it should be. And that's a good buy. And then I just started learning that way.
And were you buying and selling at all in high school at all? Or just...
I started in high school and I ended up paying for my college career by buying and selling.
So when you went to college,
Yep.
you also were going through antique, because that was at Otis, right? You went to Otis?
I went to Otis in L.A.
Yes.
And so I would be...
And that's hard to get into.
Yeah.
So you clearly did something in high school well, too, right? I mean,
Yeah, my first art show, I got my painting kicked out of because they didn't think that I did it. They thought it was my dad. So it was the Sussex County Farm and Horse Show. They kick it out because they said, "You couldn't have possibly done this." My parents got pissed. So they went down there.
How old were you at that time?
Teens, 15,
Yeah.
16, 17.
Yeah.
And I was doing multimedia stuff then, airbrush, mixed ink, paint. And they were all Westerns. So they were based on, my inspirations were goofy. They were spaghetti Westerns, stuff you'd see. And I was painting the Old West at the time there, anything I'd make up. So I was looking at Schreyvogel and Remingtons and Russells, and then kind of mixing and matching them and making my own. And I do remember at the time staring at them, because you're looking at a painting.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be going to school and laying down on my bedroom floor painting hours till midnight. My parents would go to bed. I'd be painting till 1 a.m. Eventually, they built me a studio in the upper part of the house. They cleared out a whole building and built me an art studio.
So you had the museum in your room and the studio upstairs.
Yeah, so exactly what I have now. So my life now is a slightly upgraded version of my 12-year-old bedroom. So
That's funny.
So anyway, so I'm painting, and I remember staring at the painting because you're sitting there, making all the little details. And as you're making the details, I remember my desire was two things. One, I wanted to own the cool stuff that Remington had hanging in his studio. And then the other thing was I wanted to be in that painting.
Mm-hmm.
So the strange thing was, years later when I ended up in that painting, which we'll get to when we get to where I got to, I wanted to paint less because I was living in it. So I'm now living in an Old West town. It's on the frontier.
Right.
And I see all this crazy stuff that went on 100 years ago that doesn't go on in most towns.
Right.
And so I painted less, but I just remember at the time wishing, that's why I did them. So because you could almost live it slightly by painting it. I think that drives a lot of artists. You kind of feel like you lived it by creating a
You can
scene.
feel the story.
Yeah.
Do you have to have the story in your head to be able to paint it or produce it, or can it just kind of come out inertly when you start working?
So I can't visualize anything at all. Last year was probably the first 2 years ago was maybe the start of where I actually can see stuff. But
you mean in your mind?
Yeah.
That's not uncommon, actually, by the way.
Really?
Yeah. I forget. It's a large population, and like 40% or 50% can't do it.
Yeah, I can't. I see nothing.
Yeah.
And I don't dream. When I do, it's stuff that happens, And
Right.
so I just remember that was my fallback, was I had to see it to draw it. I could draw you, and it would look like a photograph if I had 2 hours and we just stood here and draw.
Right. But if I walked away,
it would look like a child.
You couldn't visualize it in your brain. Yeah.
So I never sketched. I only went straight to a finish.
Interesting.
Which is really rare, odd. Probably not the right way to work, but
I don't know. I've seen your pieces. We have pieces of yours for sale that are your etchings. They look pretty great.
I remember in art school, the teacher said one time, "Whatever you do, don't do what he does, but we're going to let him do what he does." And they were referring to the fact that my paintings were, I painted like a printer, like that, and so it's completely blank and completely finished. So if I died in the middle of one, there'd be nothing underneath it.
Yeah, it was like a Navajo rug.
Yeah.
You start from the beginning, you work your way through.
In mine, I started from the thing furthest away, so the sky.
I see.
Work forward.
And you worked. And so you got into Otis again. So
I get into Otis.
Yeah. This is a premier art school.
Yeah.
Still is.
Well, I had my choice. So you had Parsons in New York. At that time was known for theory.
Yeah.
And you had Otis Parsons in L.A., which was known for technique.
Yes.
And I had sunshine, rain.
Yeah.
So I went to L.A. And it was a big culture shock, but that was hard. I was the first one to leave, say my family and all the roots and go that far, and I remember my guidance counselor in high school went, "Oh, you'll be back. No one makes it." Wow. Terrible advice as a guidance counselor. Yeah. She said, "Oh, I went to art school and I'm a guidance counselor." I went, "Well, I'm not coming back."
What did you think? Did you think you'd be an illustrator or a fine artist? Or
so I very specifically knew that fine art was going to be too unregimented. You're gluing chewing gum to a cinder block, and everyone's like, "Keep going in that direction."
Yeah.
And I needed to learn how to draw. I could paint because, like I said, I could paint photo real by this point, but I couldn't draw. So I needed to learn that. So I knew I had to go to art school to learn the other half. And so the only option you had, because at that time they wouldn't let you float through the different departments, I had to go into illustration. Mm-hmm. So I learned all the techniques, but I knew I wasn't going to be an illustrator, and therein lied a lot of conflict with the school. So I got in a fight with the dean, not a physical fight, but
right.
I wanted to learn how to pour a bronze or take a bronze class. And the dean said, "Well, you're an illustrator. You're not allowed to." God. And I'm like, art school, you're supposed to be allowed to do whatever you want, right? Nope, not going to do it. So I go in and I sit down in front of his desk. And I said, "I'm going to sit here until you let me take it." So he wasn't going to let me. And so I sat there for 3 days. And when I would get up to go to the bathroom, I would pin my name to the wall like that and say, "This is so you don't forget me when I'm gone." And I drove him absolutely crazy till finally he said, "Okay, you can take the class, but you don't get any credit." So I don't want the credits. I just want to learn. Exactly.
And did that change the way you saw the world when you took that sculpture course, or did you go, it was okay?
No, I did some bronzes. I did little stuff. I never did anything major, but at least I knew the technique. But my whole point of that was I wanted to learn how to draw. I wanted to learn how to paint. Yeah. And I knew that I wasn't going to be an illustrator. I was going to go, at that time I thought I was going to go to South Dakota and be a cowboy and paint. That was the plan, because you had to write down a little resume when you're in school. And
why South Dakota?
I don't know. It sounded cowboy.
Yeah.
Could have been Texas. But I ended up in Wyoming, and that came about third year of college. But just before that, a lot of the teachers were like, "We're going to break you." They hated, think about the subject we're painting. It's not art school.
Right.
So they were like, "We're going to break you." I probably should have gone to Art Center, because there's several famous Western artists that came out of Art Center.
Ed Mel, for one.
Mm-hmm. And they would have been a little more easy, but Otis was not so easy. So they'd fight with you, and I'd say, "Well, there's certain classes I'm going to take serious and certain classes I'm not." Mm-hmm. Figure out which one you're going to be, and I was paying them, I thought, so, they would be like, "We're going to make you." So one time they said, "Okay, you got to do an illustration of an automobile." So I say, "Well, does it, raise your hand, does it matter how old?" And they'd say, "No." I said, "Okay." So I'd do a covered wagon, that kind of stuff. And then when the teachers really started pounding on you, I'd start making the paintings bigger and bigger and bigger. And it got to the point where I had one that was 10 feet wide. I have a photograph of me working on it while LA's burning during the riots behind me out the window. And I'm still painting because you got to work, right? So there I am painting on horses and Jesse James riding through Northfield Parade while LA's burning out front. And I was in the worst neighborhood of the worst that you could be in.
Yes.
There was 300 people killed just in the 2 years I was there. Mm. And then I moved out to Pasadena. I would drive to school because it was just too much gunfire going on.
Yeah.
And but anyway, so I get through that, and about the third year, my parents were fascinated with the fact that I was so infatuated with the West. Mm-hmm. So they said, well, we're going to go out and see this West, you know? So they made a trip to Rapid City. They were going to do all the tourist stuff. And I said, well, I've never been there. I should go. So I met them there. And I liked traveling with my parents. It was real easy. They were older at the time, so it was easy. So I met them there, and I was fortunate. I to be the youngest. So everyone else is working. They couldn't do it.
Right.
So I'm the only one who could go with them. So we go to Rapid City, and we're traveling around the hills. And I remember getting one of those rack cards that's for the High Plains Heritage Center that said the Russell paintings, Charlie Russell paintings. And I'm thinking, I've never seen a real one. Let's go see these.
Yeah.
So before I get to that, I'll just say that it always seems from the time I was very young, I always met the right person at the right time for exactly what I needed to meet my whole life. Like 100 serendipitous events that was absolutely like I was walking a path that was already laid out. Okay.
Maybe it is.
I don't know. But it's certainly scary because it's straight. There's no curves. And so it starts there. I go into the High Plains Heritage. I walk around. I don't see any Russells. And being from the East Coast, I was a little precocious. So I said to the curator, hey, what's the deal? The curator says, well, all the paintings got pulled out because there was they're reorganizing the museum. But we're going to have our grand opening in 2 years. I said, all right, this was my second year in art school, I guess. So I said, well, I happen to do Western paintings. If you like them, would you hang them up, give me a show? And they're like, sure. I don't know why I asked, but I thought I had the mindset of writing on a resume museum show.
Right.
Just wanted to fast track things.
Right.
You know? So I went back to art school. And in that trip, the curator says, there's a little place you need to go. Hewlett, Wyoming, where I've been for the last 30 years.
Okay.
So Hewlett, Wyoming, of all places, he tells me to go to. And he said, there's an old saddle shop there, which is now my studio.
That's funny.
And he says, go take some pictures of that. That might make a good subject matter for you. And so we drive there, and I meet a gentleman there it was his saddle shop. Carson Thomas is his name. Probably the second most important person I'd met at this point, because we got to communicate. And I said I was painting the West and showed him photos. And he said, well, call me and ask me any kind of questions you need. So I would call him and ask him about details. And he was an art historian as well.
Wow.
In a way, not professionally, but I mean, he knows every bio by every Western artist there is.
Yeah.
And he was a master saddle maker himself. So he was second generation, and his dad was in World War II. So we had a lot in common, and we kept in contact. And he gave me a book he had written on saddle making. So I kept that, went back to art school. I turned every painting I ever did into... Actually, I didn't meet him that time, but that same story was a little bit later. I'll tell you how I got there now that I remember. I did meet him. I did see the saddle shop, but I didn't get to talk to him until a couple years later. So I go back to art school. I turn every assignment into a Western painting. So I'm in illustration painting oil on canvas, which is so against the rules. And I turned every assignment into a painting that I could actually sell.
Yes.
I didn't look at them as assignments.
Right.
I was fast tracking. I'm already selling in my head, which I did sell one of them, the 10-foot painting. So anyway,
what'd you give for that?
$10,000.
Holy moly! Where did it go? Do you remember?
It's at Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Oh wow!
It's in a house so big that it looks like a postage stamp.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So so I go back and I graduate, and I thought, okay. Their grand reopening was going to be that spring. Mm-hmm. So I drive my paintings.
So it had stayed in your mind the whole time to go back to see this exhibit because you wanted to see the Russells.
Right.
Okay.
So I hang up all my paintings, and they had their grand reopening. And that night, the MC was the saddle maker, Carson Thomas.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I knew him. I didn't really know him. So he comes up to me and he says, are these your dad's? Common for that period. So I said, no, they're mine. He said, where are you from? And he could tell by my hat and my pointed cowboy boots that I wasn't from there.
Yeah, you weren't local.
I wasn't local. And so I said, well, I try to get the details just right. And, he said, well, can I give you a critique? And I said, sure. And he goes, do you really want to know? I said, yep, lay it on me. So he says, you got a quick change buckle on a lace-up stirrup from a painting that's supposed to be the 1800s, and buckles didn't come out till 1930. And I went, So I literally was crushed because I was all about the details and history.
Yes.
It had to be historical. But that led to the light bulb going off that any artist of merit, painted their own time. And so that's when I went, I didn't then, but not shortly after that, switched and went, why paint the Old West? I wasn't there. I'm going to paint what's here.
Right, what I see, what I experience.
Yeah, but
I'll get the buckle right because I'll see the buckle.
Because I saw the buckle. Then you can't argue with me.
Yeah.
And so that became my lifelong journey after that. So Carson, at that point, says to me, he says, well, because I hadn't moved there, I just was going there to show my paintings. And then my plan was to go back to New Jersey, at least for a while, and figure out what I was going to do.
Yeah, you're young, like 22 or something like that.
So, the middle of South Dakota is the middle of South Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go back to New Jersey, and it just didn't feel right. After a couple of weeks, I had this gut instinct that it just wasn't right.
Yeah.
And I remember telling a friend of mine, we were kayaking down these little streams in this little historical part of New Jersey. I remember saying to him, there's got to be a place where there's nicer people out there. And he didn't have the guts to cut those severs of family because it takes a lot, at that age. So I call up Carson and I said, hey, because he had said to me that night, he said, you move out to Wyoming, I'll get you working on a ranch and I'll rent you an art studio real cheap. And he said, because he goes, you got the talent, but you just don't have the experience. He goes, I can change that. And I just remember at the time, keeping that in the head. So I call him up and I said, hey, was that offer serious? And he said, yep. So I said, all right. And so I packed up everything I owned, which was like an easel, some paints.
Right.
I had about $150 to my name, and I head out. So I rent a U-Haul. My brother Tom goes, I'm going to go with you. So I said, all right.
Older brother, right? Because you're the youngest?
I'm the youngest. I have two older brothers.
Yeah.
And so Tom says, I'll go with you. So we drive to the end of the road, which I had been on for 20 years, 15, 20 years, whatever. And I go, which way? I literally didn't have that was it. Which way do we go?
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, let me drive. So we go across pretty much the United States. So we're getting closer to Hewlett. Hewlett's a town of, at that time, 429 people. Now it's 308. So 400 people, and the next town is 15 people.
Yeah.
The next town is 33 people, 40 minutes away.
Yeah.
And then the next town has people.
And is this in Wyoming?
It's Wyoming, right on the border of South Dakota.
Okay.
So you're in the middle of nowhere. It's literally frontier.
Yeah.
No stoplights in the county. The county's as big as Connecticut.
Yeah.
And a couple of cops that you'll never see. So it's pretty much Wild Westy as you're going to get.
Yeah.
And so we're driving there, and I just remember there's not a light in the horizon in any direction. Not one. And you could only see the Milky Way touch the two horizons. And we're driving. I'm getting scared. Like, what did I just do?
Right.
20-something years old. I don't know anyone, not related to anyone. I know a guy I met once.
Yeah.
And so I drive in.
Right.
We drive down Main Street, find the building. That was going to be the apartment that I was going to rent upstairs above the saddle shop. And I'm like, dang, it's too late. Where are we going to get the key? I was trying to doorknob, and of course, it's unlocked.
Yeah.
It's Wyoming.
Yeah. We
were like, well, that's weird. So we unload my stuff, which didn't take long. Like, now what do we do? Let's go to the rodeo bar. So we go down the street and go to the rodeo bar. So there's 10 people, 2 teeth, some are teeth. Some are here, some are there. I walk in. I got long hair at the time.
Right.
And we sit down, and my brother says, I'll have a Crown of Coke and a Heineken, and I said, I don't remember what I ordered, but it was, a Busch Light. And the guy goes, $1.25. And my brother looks at me like, throws down a 20 and goes, we're staying. So after a little while, guy comes over and they're all looking at you talking,
Right.
And he looks over and he says, you here to climb Devil's Tower? I must have looked like a climber more than a cowboy, So I said, no, I just moved in. He looks at me like, yeah, right.
Right.
So he goes back talking to his friends, and pretty soon comes back over, and you're here to do the 10K race? Well, then eventually he comes over and I said, listen, I just, the Stockman building, the old saddle shop? I said, yeah, I just moved upstairs. And he goes, welcome home, and started buying beers. And my brother looks over and he's like, okay, I can leave you here.
Yeah, this is pretty cool.
Yeah. So the next day, the little lady from across the street brings me a homemade pie, Somebody else said, that's going to get hot up there, and brought me a fan.
Yeah.
And I just went, okay, this is happening. Well, then I drove my brother back to Rapid City, gets on a plane, and he leaves in, like I said, there's like 2 houses to the horizon.
Right.
And when that plane left, my heart sank.
Yeah, you have no connection to family now.
Nothing.
Which you've had a very close family.
Yeah. And I just remember thinking, okay, wow, what did I just do? And the last words my brother said to me was, he goes, well, you can always come home.
Yeah.
So I thought, no, I'm going to make this work. So I go back to town, and I literally went, whew, okay, I guess let's make this happen. So I go down to the bank. So I go to the bank to deposit my $150. And I hear this kid talking. This is one of those serendipitous lines.
Right, one of those moments.
First hour, I'm in the town, and I hear this East Coast accent, and I'm like, what's your story? So he tells me how he got there, and he was working on the IPY Ranch, which is down by Devil's Tower. And he says, we're having our branding on the weekend. Why don't you show up? He goes, I'll ask the foreman, see if you can come down. So I said, it'd be great. So I'm all excited. Wow. So then Carson comes and checks on me. He's the only guy I actually knew. So he knew that I was pretty insecure. So he comes and checks on me. Right. And we would hang out and visit. And then, of course, a month later, he leaves. He moves to Wickenburg. And I was like, wow, I just got abandoned. Now I don't know anybody.
And you're in his house and his store?
Yeah, above his saddle
So he
shop.
kept the store, but he leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was rented out. So there was a law office at that time downstairs, and he rented it to a real estate.
Yeah.
So it was a real estate law and me upstairs painting at that time.
And at this point, you're still going, I'm going to be a painter. I'm going to make paintings.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of being a cowboy hadn't really come together.
Well, I knew I had to see it to paint it.
Right.
So I needed to go see it.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, I'm invited now to a branding. Well, along with the other half of the career we were talking about earlier, the next day, Carson comes and checks on me, and he says, I got somebody you need to meet. And it was an artist, landscape painter, who lived in a log cabin way out in the middle of nowhere with his wife. His name was Tom Waugh, and he had paintings, historic paintings, and Indian beadwork, and everything dripping inside the cabin, nailed to everything. Little tiny cabin that he built himself. But he was living his dream, as an artist. And he started out as a railroader, a rock and roller, hell raiser. At one point, he was chief of the police. He was the first law enforcement on the scene at the Jumping Bull Camp during the American Indian Movement uprising. So that's where the start of the Russell Means came from.
Got it, from that guy. And that's because he said you need to go meet this guy.
Well, that happens later, but so I meet.
But I mean,
Carson says you got to meet this
Tom.
guy. Yeah, and he says you got to meet Tom Waugh.
Yeah. So
Tom, man, we just hit it off. We end up back in his library full of books talking about Sharp and Tenny Johnson, and he saw my work, so he knew he knew that I just walked into town and something changed for him. So he was like, I don't have what you have, but I know the people you need to know, kind of a feeling, He didn't say that, but I just know that. And so I remember walking around his house and I see this pair of spurs. They were Garcias, but not the early Garcia, later ones. And they had jingle bobs on them. And I remember going, oh my God, these are so amazing. How much are these? Because everything was for sale, just like any trader's house. And he goes, $650. I'm like, oh my God, put them back on the nail. Well, then the next day he comes down to my studio and he was looking at my paintings and stuff, and he throws the spurs on the couch and he says, you owe me something in the next year. And that's how we became friends. We were like instantly friends. And so I found out years later, after he died, that Carson had coveted those spurs. So I wrote this story about how he gave me those spurs after he died. We're putting stuff online about him. And Carson says, "You want to know the rest of that story?" He goes, "I coveted those spurs. For 10 years, I tried to get them." He goes, I'd take my cowboy hat and jingle those jingle bobs every time I was at his house and say, "Sell them to me." And he'd say, "Nope." And then one day I go up there and they're gone. And he goes, "Where's the spurs? I thought you were never going to sell them." And he said, "I gave them to the boy." And that's that. So that's how I got them. And so I'm now in Wyoming. A week later, I met the 3 or 4 most people important in my life, and I got a pair of spurs. So we're on our way. So then Carson makes me a pair of short chaps, chinks, they call them. And so I had a pair of chinks. And so I'm getting there. So I go down that weekend. I go down to the IPY ranch that the foreman said I could come down. So I tuck my hair under my hat, because I still had long hair. And
we talking shoulder length kind of hair?
Oh, yeah, below shoulder length.
Oh, yeah, really long.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eddie Vedder style.
Yeah.
This is the 90s. Okay. So I got it tucked up, and I get to this. I don't know anyone, so I'm not a social guy. I'm very one-on-one. I'm good. Crowds, I'm horrible.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of standing on. I'm a wallflower at this point at the dance,
Right.
And so they're like, "Who are you?" Mm-hmm. I've got a camera,
right?
Cowboy hat. That's not a cowboy hat.
Yeah.
And I bought it at Wall Drug. And
yeah.
So
Rexall Ranger.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they're like, "Where are you from?" I said, "Hewlett, Wyoming." And they go, "Not with a camera in your hand, you're not." So I'm like, "All right, you got me." So I start throwing around some photographs that I brought of paintings that I had done.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh my God, I want you at my branding. I want you at my branding. I want you at my branding." And so the foreman was George White. He was also born on the same day. And he eventually became super good friends. He took me under his wing and made sure I didn't get killed.
Yeah.
And basically, he knew what I needed to see.
Yeah.
He was a fan of Western art, and he just goes, "All right, show up at the ranch 4 o'clock tomorrow morning."
Yeah.
So I do. So I show up, and he's out there roping horses. So he ropes me a horse, and then he saddles it, shows me how not to get killed or kicked.
Right.
And so I saddled up, and at that time I had a camera that was in a holster, so I could I had to use film, so I had canisters like bullets,
Yeah.
And so, we go out and we're gathering cows on the ranch, and previous to that, I'd been like one day before I got invited to go to a branding. Super nice people, super great, but they branded with a squeeze chute, And I just remember at the time thinking, "Now I need to see something more
organic,
authentic." Yeah, more Old West. And so that's when I ended up on the IPY, which I couldn't have landed up in a better place or with a better guy, because he just literally adopted me at that point. And so I became his free hired hand, right? So I didn't take a wage, so he couldn't fire me, and I could go home and paint when I wanted to, because I didn't want to be fixing fence.
Right.
I don't need to fix fence to paint fixing fence. So I'm like, hey, long story short, so I get there, and we go out and we're helping neighbors. So all those, they still community help each other. So a branding, if you need more hands. So at a branding, you might have 5 of your friends, neighboring ranches help you. And at the end, the pay is a barbecue. And then you go to theirs. And
yes, everybody helps.
Yeah. So and you end up covering a pretty big swath of the countryside. I ended up, at first, they would saddle my horse. And then one day George goes, "Okay, we're done babysitting you. If you want to ride a horse, you want to catch your own." So they'd show you how to catch it. So now I'm painting at night, basically free labor on the ranch during the day, and then volunteering all over the countryside to help out. Shooting pictures, but still getting involved. So I'd help wrestle calves. We'd gather. You'd get there at 4 a.m. before the sun gets up. You're loping along with 7 cowboys across the prairie.
Right.
You got to go get, you got to find 300 head of cows on 10,000 acres or 30,000 acres. So you're covering countryside. Huh. And I could remember at one time where they're like, "Okay, go 7 miles that way, and bring back everything you find." And I'm thinking, okay, this thing doesn't have an odometer on it. How am I going to know where I'm at 7 miles? So that became subject matters. I'd take notes, and I quoted all the cowboys, and I'd write them down if I heard something funny.
And you'll still see that on your etchings that you do.
Those are all quotes.
Yeah, you have quotes, which really, tells your story how you see it.
Yeah.
And we'll put some of these up on the video too, so people can see what these etchings are.
Yeah, you had one here that I bought back, and it was called.
Yeah.
It's called Weather Quits.
Yeah.
And the title was because I'm in my shop, And this old cowboy comes in and he's smoking a cigarette and he's putting it out old style, like in a cuff that he'd made on the bottom of his boots.
Yeah.
And I said, his name was Jess Driscoll. Legendary family. They came from the Driscoll, Texas Driscoll Hotel Driscolls and trailed cattle in the 1800s and ended up in the Hewlett area. So the family goes back. And I think one of the Driscolls even got in a bar fight with Wyatt Earp. So they're a known family.
Right. A known entity.
Yeah. They're part of the lore. So right away, Jess took a liking to me. And he's sitting down, and I go, Jess, I got something you got to see. I'm still collecting antiques at this time, too. And I had this hat, Tom Mix style, sewn brim from the 20s. So I show it to him, and it's kind of floppy. And he goes, oh, hell. He goes, you could take some sugar water and stiffen this thing back up. If you ever get hard up for food, you can eat the sumbitch. I write that down. So that became a title of one of my more famous etchings, which I put when this weather quits because it's raining. Right. Hats are all getting floppy. So I wrote that down as the title.
So you're doing this, you're learning about cowboying, you learn how to actually rope your horse, get your horse, follow it along, you're free labor basically. Yeah. But your idea was I want to document with camera primarily, right?
Camera and
visually
notes.
Seeing it too, yeah. And then at night you're painting.
Yep.
And then are you able to sell these paintings? What are you doing with the things you're doing?
So I was. So it would take me a month or two to paint them. And then I would just have enough money to get by to get it sold. And the light bulb went off real quick. Like within first 2 or 3 months.
Yes.
The light bulb goes off. Because I was still painting the Old West. I was trying to turn modern scenes into older scenes.
Yes.
And I just went, this is dumb. And so I would live half a year in Wyoming, half a year in Santa Barbara.
And why Santa Barbara? Because of Barine?
Not because of Barine. That ended up a fortuitous move, but because it was beautiful.
And warm.
Yeah. I'm allergic to snow.
Yeah.
And so in the winter, everything shuts down. There's no cow work anyway. So it worked better. Plus, I was building at the same time 2 art careers. I was building an art career in California and an art career in Wyoming. I'm considered a Santa Barbara artist at this point because I was there for decades. And so there's houses that have my artwork all the way up the Central Coast, which is Borean country.
And what kind of artwork is that? Is that different? Is that more of Caballeros kind of?
I did not do that because I was overwhelmed with the amount of knowledge. I came from such a different culture. When I got to Wyoming, the dream was to make everything absolutely authentic. So I had to see it. But I couldn't understand anything. For the first 3 years, I practically didn't talk to anybody because I wrote down what they said, but I didn't understand what they were saying. It was a different language. They're talking about grass and cattle. One day I'm driving around the ranch we're riding around IPY, and George one day goes over to me and he says, "You don't have much of a personality." I'd say, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I keep making jokes and you never laugh." Right. I'm like, "Well, you got to understand cattle before you know a joke about cattle. Right. You got to understand grass before you can understand a joke about grass." So that was kind of that learning curve. My dream was to do all the different cowboy cultures, even go down to South America, like Remington, do the buckaroos, the Californios, all of that. But so I understood the history because at night I'm also reading books about it. So Joe Mora and all these artists that captured their section. But then it got too overwhelming. I had to do my section. I couldn't do it all. There was I wasn't prolific enough. So, and I had to learn too much. I'm learning how to paint. I'm learning how to the history, and I'm learning a culture I've never been in, and I'm trying to learn how to cowboy and do it all at the same time.
Plus, you're trying to find your voice, right?
Right.
What's going to sell?
Right.
I mean, you're an artist.
Yeah.
You got to sell to make a living.
So I wormed my way into a really good art show, and I'll go back to that because that's a really funny story. Because at that show, there I am standing next to Howard Turpning, Robert Pummel, Roy Anderson.
What was this? The Masters?
Not the Masters.
What was the show?
Settlers West.
Okay.
The miniature show.
Yeah, okay.
So I want, like, again, I'm in a hurry. I got to fast track. I got to make a living. I can't be going to local art shows selling stuff for $100. I got to go right to the top, right?
Right.
So I call Stuart up. I say, Stuart, how do I go about click? He hangs up on me. So, which in his defense, because I love him, in his defense, I'm sure he gets calls from all over the country, and he's gonna find you if you're worth finding. Yeah. You know? But I needed it to go faster, so I didn't know how to do this. So I call him up. So I see his partner in the books. You know, his partner's Bob Drummond. So I call Bob Drummond up. How would I go about to be considered to be in the click? now the Jersey kicks in. I call back Stuart and I go, do I have to get in the car and come down there? Something like that. I didn't threaten him exactly, but I just I went like, what are you doing?
Right.
So he goes, who are you? I said, well, my name's Bob Coronato. And he said, I never heard of you. So he says, what do you sell your paintings for? I told him. And he goes, that's an outrage. He goes, so-and-so, and I won't mention his name, is in the Cowboy Artists of America. And he doesn't even get that. And I said, yeah, well, he paints like he doesn't have fingers. And so Stuart starts laughing. He goes, okay. He goes, well, if your paintings aren't everything you say they are, don't ever call me back. I said, fine.
Wow, that's really brutal.
Yeah. So I throw and this is after being shot down by a lot of galleries. So I was done,
Yeah.
And this led to me opening the antique store. Okay, but I'll get to that. So I throw all these photographs, 5 years, 10 years worth of work,
Right.
Everything in the FedEx, you know. And I write a little letter and I said, Stuart, here's a couple of images I dashed off one weekend with my arm tied behind my back, and if you don't like them, I'll eat the painting of your choice. And I mail it off. And I think, well, I just screwed up my career. I didn't realize I almost did. So I was done. That kind of coincided with Tom Waugh seeing the frustrations, and so Tom says to me one day, he snaps a bush light and he goes, let's turn that building of yours into an art gallery. He goes, it'll scare the hell out of the locals. I said, all right, let's do it. I go, I don't have any antiques and stuff. He goes, I got sheds full of antiques. He goes, but you got some art. So that's when we decided to join forces unofficially, partner on opening an art gallery. So I remember I kind of just threw my hands in the air up that summer and said, I quit. I'm done. I'm done with this. It's just too hard. And
painting.
Yeah.
And because what did he do when he get all that stuff? Did he let you in?
Yeah. He called me up.
He said, okay, you don't have to eat one?
He calls me up and he's laughing and he goes, okay, I want you in my spring show, the miniature show, and the Coeur d'Alene art auction.
Okay.
I was pretty right to the top.
Yeah, no, that is.
And I wasn't as prolific as he probably would have liked, but I do remember, though, it goes back to what we were talking about. So I paint from stuff I'd seen on the IPY, stuff I'd been helping all over Montana. I remember June 9th in Newcastle, Wyoming, we got snowed on, foot deep. So there's cattle all going up through this big, there's 1,200 head of cows going to their summer pasture in snow.
Yeah.
And we're all riding horseback, and I did a painting of that. And so that became the show painting for the spring show, where it was there's a guy bending down picking up calves in the snow.
And you were selling.
Yeah.
And he was selling. So now all of a sudden things kind of flip.
Right.
You're in a good gallery, one of the best.
Yeah.
And you're selling.
I wasn't prolific enough to be making a ton of money.
Yeah.
Just enough to get going though.
Right. I mean, get a name.
Yeah.
People are starting to go, who's
that? Yeah. So I did a painting of a cowboy wearing sunglasses because all my friends are wearing sunglasses.
Right.
And I remember, I think it was Bob Pummel. He goes, well, first of all, I did a nighttime painting. So Howard sees me, and they're all gathered around in a circle, and I knew who they were. So I nuzzled into the circle, and they're all like, so who, is your dad here?
Again.
Yeah. And I don't remember who said that. Might have been Roy Anderson said that. I go, no. No, I got a painting here. And so they said, which one? I said, the nighttime one hanging right next to yours. And Howard goes, well, enjoy tonight because we're going to take you out in the desert and kill you.
Okay, why is that?
He was just joking.
Okay.
That was his compliment.
Okay.
I took it as a compliment.
Yeah,
anyway.
okay.
He's like, enjoy tonight. We're going to take you out in the desert and kill you.
Okay.
So then the next year when I was down there, I showed up with the painting of the cowboy with the sunglasses on, and it was Bob Pummel who said, well, it'll never sell. It sold, but he was from the mindset of, it'll never sell. It's too contemporary.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, all my friends wear sunglasses, so that's what I'm going to paint.
Right.
And he kind of looked at me kind of tipped his head to the side well, that's weird, but, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's so funny that for them at that moment, just wearing sunglasses was too contemporary.
Yeah.
I mean, if they see what's going on now, they would be like, what is that?
Exactly.
Or if Howard Post had brought one of his out at that time, he was a real cowboy, a real rodeo guy.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have probably understood that at all.
Right.
But, it was always there. They were just insulated.
Yeah.
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 And so when you go back and you start with Waugh to open this gallery,
mm-hmm.
you go, okay, I'm selling at Stewart's, I'm making some money. but I can barely make it, even if I'm selling, because I'm too slow a painter.
Right.
And my prices aren't high enough.
Right.
And you go to start this gallery in the old leather store.
Yep.
And Tom's store.
Yep.
And then does he sell it to you guys?
Okay. Awesome that you asked. So Carson's dad actually owned it.
Yeah.
Tommy Thomas was his name. He World War II vet. And I didn't know. He told me he got yellow fever. He was in the Pacific, so he got yellow fever on one of the islands, and the native people saved him.
Mm.
So unbeknownst, that'll make sense here in a minute. When I first got there, and I found out he owned it, I said, "Tommy, give me first shot at this building if I ever get a chance to buy it." He goes, "Got my word." And a handshake deal up there is a handshake deal, still to this day. Yeah. My brother just bought a building on a handshake.
Yeah, of course.
And so 5 years in, my career still hadn't gotten off the ground, but I was clicking. I didn't have to borrow money. I was still making it, and I was just getting by. I was sitting in my stairwell eating spinach leaves. I could make one bag last 3 days. I didn't have a chair, so I was sitting in the stairwell, and I had a mattress I stole off the IPY from one of the bunkhouses, but I was getting by. I was living the dream. I did cry a bunch to my mom. I'd be like, "What did I do?" Because you go to law school, you come out, you're a lawyer. You go to dental school, you come out, you're a dentist. You go to art school, you're homeless. Yeah. And so you really got to start small. Yeah. And so about 5 years in, Tommy calls me up and he says, "I gave you my word that I give you first crack at that building. So here's what I want for it." So I said, "All right, let me call my dad and see if he can crunch the numbers and see what that monthly payment would be."
Right.
So I call my dad. We do the crunch the numbers. Here's what it's going to be. I'm like, "Oh man, I can't do that." So I called Tommy up and I said, "Tommy," I go, I can't swing it. I go, "My career hasn't gotten off the ground just yet." So he says, "Well, you're the only guy I want to own that building because you're going to keep it Western." He knew. Yeah. And so I said, "Okay." He said, "How about this? You pick the price. You pick the interest rate. You pick the amount of years you want to pay on it. The first year you don't owe a payment. The second year you owe a third. Next year the half. Next year 3/4. And by the fifth year, if your career hasn't gotten off the ground, pick another career." That was the start of my life right there.
Wow.
And that building became the center of everything.
What a generous thing.
Yeah. I found out years later that he donated whatever I picked to the Advancing Native Missions to help Native people. And so my mortgage was going to that. So it didn't matter to him. And he did that because they had saved his life.
And the yellow fever.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
So it was a full
So
circle.
now you have this great building.
It wasn't great.
But would be. Great location.
No.
No, not even that?
I mean, yes, in a way.
Well, what do you need for it then?
In a way, it's the greatest location because I have people come in. I have 100 people a day now stop in, and I don't have to advertise.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm going by a national, a scenic route to a national monument.
Yeah, and you probably, is there, maybe there's a gallery in there now besides you, is there? Or you?
No, I'm it. I'm on the art gallery in 100 miles.
And it's still 500 people or 600 people?
It's now down to 308.
308.
But it's changing. It's gentrifying.
I would think.
We've got an 18-hole golf course with a Learjet strip, and there's a lot of secondary homes going up. So it got discovered.
Yeah.
And so it is becoming like the greatest location. But for me at the time, it was only going to be my studio. I really didn't think of a store, and then it kind of had a store, but I didn't think it was going to turn into what it has now. But
which is what? What is it now?
So we walk. Okay, so picture an old West building with false front.
Yes.
Coffins out front. A jail cell from the 1800s. Makes you go, whoa. So you stop, you get out. People are laying in there taking pictures, the old West kind. It's got a hitching post for horses, and there's horses sometimes hitched up.
I bet.
My Model A parks out front. You go through the front door. It's got gold leaf painting on the front door. It says studio of, and it says, if I'm not here, I'm open 23 and a half hours a day. If I'm not here, that's when I was gone. So, you walk in, the front room is tin ceilings, hardwood floors from the 1800s, cash register from the 1800s.
And is that floor on the ceiling original, or did you add that later?
When I first got it, it had carpet from the 1960s on top of plywood on top of the original floors.
Got it.
But I could hear them creaking.
Yeah.
So I think they're under there.
Yeah.
So as soon as I owned it, I stripped it back to way it was.
Yeah, and they were there.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And did the tin ceiling, was it there too, or did you put that
I had
in?
to put that in.
Yeah.
It was original. There was one, and it got tore out like in
Yeah.
the 60s.
Yeah, they usually put asbestos
Right.
tiles.
So I gave some kids off the IPY a 6-pack of beer, and I left the building, and they went in and yanked the ceilings down.
Nice.
But there was no asbestos in there.
Yeah.
There was just a lot of coal dust from years of coal stove in there. So I took the coal stove out and put in one from the 1800s. It's got the old stovepipe. The next room is an art gallery with my etchings, lighting. I put in nice lighting. And then there's historic art mixed in with some antiques. And then the back half, and it's a pretty large building. Not as great as this, but it's a miniature version. Then there's a museum. And when you walk through, I don't have the little flute playing music like you always see in the. It's not quiet. It's 9 guys sitting around a drum singing 49 songs.
Yeah.
So as soon as you walk in, tourists who've never heard that just immediately like, whoa, what's going on? And so you walk in and there's just jam full of Old West guns and shirts and lances and stuff that I found over the years. So as I was building my career in art, every time I went to an art show, I'd hit every antique store and junk store on the way, and I'd find stuff.
Yeah, and you're learning the whole way. You're figuring it out, what this is, what's right, what isn't.
Right. In the beginning, I would show Tom because he had been doing it for 50 years. So and he'd go, that's fake.
Yeah.
And he'd tell, and he couldn't really explain it, but eventually I figured out with forensics and restoring some things that.
Yeah, you can figure it out.
You figure it out.
And you look at it.
Yeah.
And you observe and all that stuff.
You got to handle a lot of stuff.
Just when you were 15 and got the Strogoal, you have a book you run, you go and see, that's his signature, it looks right. And you do the same thing. I'm sure you still do it, and I do it too.
Yeah. And I've found some major things over the years. I mean, like 5 or 10 of like some of the greatest items that came up. And
you buy and sell this stuff too. Some is for your museum and for your gallery, but
my philosophy was always not to keep the best.
Yeah.
That's so opposite of most collectors. I would sell the best, keep the mediocre.
Yeah.
Because the average tourist wouldn't understand that tobacco bag's worth $40,000 when this one's worth $1,200. Right. They just see one as the same. Yes. We know the difference. It's an art thing. So keep the $1,200, sell the $30,000 one, Yeah. And so over the years, I was able to find having an artist's eye and a detective brain, I was able to scan and zoom in on the real rare stuff.
Right.
And had a lot of luck, too, finding some really great things.
So at this point in your career, now, as we speak today,
do
you consider yourself an artist, an art dealer, antique dealer, or something hybrid of all those?